"I hated them," the boy said, without blinking. 14 years old, sitting in a police interrogation room, calmly explaining why his father and younger brother would never breathe again. But what drove a child to plan such horror and execute it without remorse? The answers lie deeper than anyone imagined. The first thing they saw was blood. Thick, dark pools congealed on the wooden floor, staining it in uneven blotches that stretched from the hallway to the bedroom beyond. The sharp, metallic scent of it hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, clinging to the back of the throat. No one spoke at first. Even seasoned officers paused at the threshold, the beam of their flashlights wavering ever so slightly. In the corner of the room, beneath an overturned mattress, the pale, lifeless body of a young boy lay twisted, his arms marked by deep, ragged wounds. Blood had soaked through the thin fabric of his shirt, pooling beneath him. The wall behind the bed was streaked with smeared handprints, frantic and desperate. A machete, its blade coated in gore, lay discarded a few feet away. And in the living room, another body. Slumped against a battered nightstand, the father, Eldon Samuel Jr., sat in a grotesque sprawl, eyes wide open, mouth frozen mid-gasp. 3 distinct gunshot wounds marred his face, while a dark trail of blood marked the path he had crawled in his final moments. Nearby, the boy, Eldon Samuel III, 14 years old, sitting cross-legged on the porch when officers arrived, his hands stained red to the wrists, his gaze empty. Not a flicker of fear, not remorse, just nothing. Such scenes are not born from sudden madness. They are shaped, forged in silence, in isolation, under the slow, crushing weight of years. This house had long ceased to be a home. It was a cage of fear, a place where twisted beliefs festered unchecked. The father, gripped by paranoia, obsessed with visions of a coming apocalypse. Zombies, the end of the world, a delusion that infected every corner of his mind, and that of his son. It was not merely a child's fantasy. It was doctrine, taught, repeated, reinforced. Weapons were stockpiled, drills conducted. "Be ready," the father had said. And so Eldon learned to shoot, to stab, to survive. But more than that, he learned resentment, bitterness, toward a father who struck him, toward a brother, Jonathan, who drew what little affection remained. The boy was autistic, helpless, a target for frustration. The mother had fled long ago, after years of violence, leaving the 2 boys trapped in this decaying spiral, alone with a man sinking deeper into delusion. In such an environment, hate festers. It coils in the dark, waiting. That night, the trigger was pulled long before the first shot was fired. When Eldon Sr., under the fog of drugs and fear, fired his gun into the night, raving about unseen enemies, something in the boy snapped. No longer fear, no longer submission, but a cold, deliberate resolve. The path from thought to action was not instantaneous. It never is. These things simmer. The boy had thought about it before, admitted as much later. The idea had taken root, and now opportunity presented itself. The father returned, violent, striking the boy again, a final spark. Moments later, Eldon retrieved the pistol hidden beneath the couch. A practiced move, not panicked, not rushed. Then the shots, aimed, purposeful. The father fell, crawled, bled. The boy followed, unflinching. When the bullets were spent, he switched weapons, each choice deliberate. The knife, the shotgun, the machete. The sequence speaks volumes. Overkill. A release of years of stored rage, and something darker. A hunger to erase. Jonathan had no chance. Trapped beneath the bed, terrified. The brutality inflicted upon him cannot be explained by fear alone. It was hate, pure, unfiltered. And through it all, the boy's face remained unchanged. Witnesses noted it. In the patrol car, in the interrogation room. No tears, no shaking hands, a chilling vacancy. The question that would haunt investigators was simple. Why? What drives a child to such extremes? The answer is not simple. In part, he was a victim. Conditioned, manipulated, abandoned by every adult who should have protected him. But victimhood does not absolve. The level of violence, the choices made, suggest more than mere reaction. Something had broken long before that night, and when the opportunity came, it was not hesitation that followed, but action. The blood still glistened on the floor when they finally led him away. Outside, dawn had begun to break, pale light filtering through gray clouds. Cold, silent. Just another morning. But inside that house, something unspeakable had unfolded, and the boy at its center was no longer a boy at all. That was only the beginning. The hours that followed unfolded with a strange, almost unnatural calm. Inside the interrogation room, the light overhead hummed softly, casting a sterile glow over the cold metal table. Eldon sat with his hands folded loosely in front of him. His clothes were stiff with dried blood, the dark stains cracking with each slight movement. His face remained empty, as though the events of the night had already slipped from his mind. An investigator entered quietly, taking the seat across from him. No raised voice, no accusations. Only a steady tone, calm, almost gentle. They had learned long ago that force rarely yielded truth with someone like this. There was a pause, a moment of silence between them, before the first question came. "Do you know why you are here?" A slow nod, barely perceptible. The conversation began with surface details, where the weapons had been kept, what had happened when his father came back inside. The boy answered in short, clipped phrases, as though describing something that had happened to someone else. But soon, the investigator shifted. "Why did you do it?" This time, the pause was longer. The boy's fingers twitched faintly, the only sign of any inner movement. His gaze remained downcast, locked on the table. Then, a soft voice. "I hated them." No tremor in the words, no regret. Only a simple, unvarnished truth. The investigator leaned forward slightly, not pressing, not accusing, only listening. "You hated them. Why?" Another pause. Longer this time. The boy's breathing slowed, then deepened. His words came in fragments. He spoke of the beatings, of his father's rages, of the years spent watching his mother suffer, of the endless drills, the weapons, the talk of apocalypse, of being left alone, trapped with someone who taught him that the world was a threat, and that killing was survival. And beneath it all, jealousy toward Jonathan, the brother who received what little affection remained, the brother whose needs dominated every moment of their father's time, the brother who, in the boy's mind, had ruined what little life he might have had. But there was something else, something colder. When the investigator asked if he had planned this, if he had thought about it before, the boy hesitated for the first time. His lips pressed into a thin line. His eyes flickered just once. Then, yes. For how long? A shrug, then years. The words hung in the air, heavy, chilling. This was not an impulsive act, born only of a single night's rage. The seeds had been sown long ago, watered by neglect, by fear, by hatred. Slowly, they had taken root, and when the moment came, he had acted with a terrifying clarity. He described it all, switching weapons when one was not enough, the deliberate choice of the machete, knowing full well what it would do, the refusal to stop even when Jonathan no longer moved, even when the blood soaked the floor. The investigator listened carefully, watching not only the words but the spaces between them. The boy's tone never wavered. His breath never quickened. There were no tears, no shame. At one point, the investigator asked, "Do you feel sorry?" Another pause. The boy's head tilted slightly, as though considering the question. Not in a moral sense, but as a matter of fact. "No, I do not." The words, spoken plainly, stripped of all pretense, were perhaps the most chilling of all. What had happened in that house was not an accident, not a tragedy born of a fleeting loss of control. It was something darker, the final result of years of emotional decay. And as the boy sat in that room, beneath the sterile hum of the light, one truth became clear. Whatever innocence had once existed within him was gone. And there, in the silence that followed, one could not help but wonder what might have been had someone reached him sooner. The courtroom was silent, unnervingly so. A space usually filled with the low hum of voices, the shuffling of papers, now held only the faint echo of footsteps on polished tile. The boy entered flanked by guards, his slight frame swallowed by the loose gray uniform. He did not look up. His gaze remained fixed ahead, unblinking, detached. Observers watched him with a mixture of disbelief and discomfort. Some had come out of morbid curiosity, others seeking answers they were unlikely to find, but all seemed struck by the same disquieting thought, that this was a child who had killed, a child who had shown no remorse. The prosecutor's voice broke the stillness, calm, deliberate, as if choosing each word with care. There was no need for theatrics. The facts alone carried a terrible weight. He began with the timeline, the father's increasing instability, the stockpiling of weapons, the obsession with an imagined apocalypse, the constant exposure to violence and paranoia, the physical abuse, the isolation. Then came the night of the killings, methodical, calculated, the first shots delivered with precision, the switch from firearm to blade, the relentless nature of the attack on Jonathan, the sheer brutality, far beyond what was necessary to subdue. Images of the crime scene were presented with clinical detachment, yet the reaction in the room was visceral. Some averted their eyes, others stared, as if trying to reconcile the boy before them with the horror captured in those photographs. The defense spoke softly, weaving a narrative of a broken child, a victim of his environment. They spoke of years of neglect, of untreated trauma, of a mind shaped by fear and twisted beliefs. They did not deny what had been done, but sought to explain how such darkness could take root. And yet, certain questions remained. Why the choice to continue, weapon after weapon? Why the lack of hesitation? Why the absence of any visible regret? The boy himself was asked, his responses flat. When asked again if he felt sorry, the answer came with the same eerie calm. There was a moment when the judge, having listened in silence, looked directly at him and asked, "Do you understand what you have done?" The boy's eyes finally lifted. For the first time, a flicker of awareness. Not sorrow, not guilt, but understanding. He nodded, slowly. As the trial neared its conclusion, the question hanging in the air was no longer simply what sentence should be imposed, but something deeper. Could this boy be saved? Or had the years of damage already sealed his path? The verdict came after deliberation. Guilty. Second degree for the father. first degree for Jonathan. The sentence, 20 years, time that for someone so young would span nearly the remainder of his formative life. As he was led away, the room remained still. No outbursts, no applause, just silence. Outside, the world continued. Rain had begun to fall, soft and steady. Those who had watched the proceedings filed out beneath gray skies, their expressions subdued, reflective. And in the days that followed, many would return to the same haunting thought. How many other children live unseen in such darkness? How close do they come to the same edge? Some tragedies do not begin on the day of blood. They begin in the years before, in the silent rooms, behind closed doors, and sometimes, by the time the world finally looks inside, it is too late. Time moved differently in the weeks that followed. Outside the courthouse, life carried on. The steady rhythm of a small town slowly returning after the initial wave of shock. But for those who had seen inside that house or sat through the testimony, the events of that night lingered like a bruise that would not fade. For the investigators, the case was closed. The evidence was clear, the confession undeniable. Yet even they found no satisfaction in the verdict. There had been no justice here, only tragedy and questions. So many questions. One, in particular, remained. When had this begun? Not on the night of the killings. No, much earlier. In reviewing the boy's history, a pattern emerged. Years of missed school days. Reports of domestic violence, most uninvestigated. A mother who had once sought help, but fled instead. A father spiraling into addiction and paranoia. And in the midst of it all, a child watching, absorbing. There were opportunities to intervene. Teachers who noticed bruises, but no follow-up. Neighbors who heard the fights, but looked the other way. A system that had seen the warning signs, but failed to act. And so, the boy remained trapped. In that house. In that world. Professionally, I have seen many such cases. Children shaped by violence, taught to hate, to fear. It corrodes them, slowly, until the difference between right and wrong blurs, then disappears. What was once unthinkable becomes inevitable. But even knowing this, the sheer brutality of what he had done was difficult to reconcile. The calculated progression, the choice of weapons, the methodical nature of each act. This was not blind rage. It was something colder, more deliberate. One cannot ignore the psychological toll of growing up in such an environment. Chronic trauma changes the brain, heightens the threat response, diminishes empathy. In Eldon's case, the father's obsession with survivalism, the endless drills, the exposure to violent imagery had primed the boy for one thing only: to see the world as hostile, to view violence as solution. The brother, Jonathan, was in the end not a threat. Not in any true sense, but in the twisted logic the boy had developed. Jonathan represented everything wrong with their lives. The source of his father's anger, the reason for his mother's absence, the obstacle to any hope of peace. And so, he erased him, in the most final, brutal way imaginable. In interviews after the sentencing, some asked, could he have been saved? The answer is painful, yes. Had someone intervened early? Had the abuse been addressed? Had there been counseling, a safe environment? Perhaps this boy might never have reached that breaking point. But no one came, and so the damage deepened, year after year, until that night. When I reflect on this case, I do not think first of the crime scene, nor the courtroom, nor the verdict. I think of the boy, 14, sitting alone in an interrogation room. speaking of hatred as though it were natural, of murder without remorse. And I think of all the small moments, the missed chances that led him there. Because these things do not happen in isolation. They build, quietly, until the silence is broken by something no one can undo. And by then, it is too late. In the months that followed, the case faded from headlines. Another tragedy replaced it, as they always do. The world moves on, but those closest to it, those who had seen the truth beneath the surface, did not forget so easily. I still find myself returning to the scene in my mind, not the blood nor the broken bodies, though those images remain. No, what haunts me most is quieter, smaller, the silence in that house, the way each room seemed frozen in time, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the years of fear and hatred and loneliness. There were signs of a life half lived. A school backpack in the corner still packed, a broken toy beneath the couch, notes scrawled in a child's uncertain hand, listing supplies for some imagined apocalypse. And then there was his room, sparse, neat, too neat for a boy his age. On the desk, a single sheet of paper, a drawing of a house surrounded by what looked like fences, high, sharp, no doors, no windows. I remember standing there, the air cold against my skin, the hum of the forensic lights filling the space. And I thought, what does it do to a child to grow up inside walls like these? Walls built not of wood and plaster, but of fear. In reviewing the boy's psychological evaluations, a clearer picture emerged. Years of chronic trauma, disrupted attachment, cognitive distortions, beliefs so deeply ingrained they felt like truths. His father's delusions had become his own. Violence was not a last resort. It was the only language he had learned. The experts debated whether he fully understood the finality of what he had done. Some argued he did not, that his emotional development had been so stunted, so arrested, that the concept of loss, of grief, held no meaning. But I am not so sure. There was a moment, brief but unmistakable. During the final interview, when asked about his brother, his voice faltered, just for a breath. The mask slipped, and something flickered beneath. Was it regret? Recognition? I cannot say, but it was there, and then it was gone. The system did what it could. The sentence was handed down. Treatment was recommended. Yet even now, there are no easy answers, no assurances. What happens to a child shaped so completely by violence? Can those pathways be undone, or merely managed, contained? I have studied many like him. Some recover, some do not. And that is what lingers, long after the courtroom is emptied, long after the headlines fade. Because for every Eldon Samuel, there are others, children unseen, living in the shadows of homes that look, from the outside, ordinary. Until one day, the silence breaks. And when it does, we ask ourselves the same questions. Could it have been prevented? Were there signs we missed? Warnings we ignored? The truth is, almost always, yes. And that is why I tell this story. Not to sensationalize, not to horrify, but because behind every such case lies a choice. The choice to look or to look away. And the cost of looking away is written in blood on the floor of that house, still.